All right, welcome back. So now it's time for the final panel for the day. Availability of freighters. Well, normally in my conferences, I do not deal with freighter issues. I leave that thing to other conferences. But now, when freighter capacity is a highly important matter, I felt that when we do the World Cargo Summit, we have to discuss and learn where will needed freighter capacity come from. Are we talking about full freighters already available? Do we need more freighter conversions? So I'm very happy to welcome our old friend based in Seattle, Thomas Crabtree. He's market analysis air cargo at Boeing Commercial Airplanes. So I understand that it's very early in the morning down there. So welcome, Thomas, and I wish you all the best. Thomas, are you still sleeping?
Tom, I think you're on.
You're on. Okay, great. Welcome.
I think Tom's frozen.
Yeah, I can see.
No, I'm waiting for Lars to finish.
I'm
Oh, he
finished.
is.
Welcome, Tom. The show is yours.
Thank you, Lars, and sorry for the pause. We had a really good echo here in suburban Seattle. Good evening, especially those of you in East Asia, where we just heard from Stephen Verhasselt in Hong Kong, where it's now well past 11 p.m. And good afternoon to those of you in Europe. And good morning to those of you here in North America. Am I broadcasting? Great. Okay. Lars, just for the record, I think we have a distinct echo.
Tom, can you step in and correct the echo?
I've got a really bad echo here on my line. I'm going to get quite to the point. Frederick, why don't you go ahead and start your presentation, please?
Okay, all right, I'll do that over to me. All right, here we go. Availability of freighters. So welcome everyone. I'd like to talk about a few things today. First of all, just give you a bit of a rundown of where we stand with the jet freighter fleet at the beginning of 2021. 1917 is the magic number of aircraft in service, at least by our count. Then looking a little bit at who operates what in which segments, because this is quite key with regard to the whole demand-supply balance issue. Then, well, what's on the menu, the freighter fleet choices that we have going forward. Who's who in the zoo, conversion options explained, and some thoughts on demand and supply in 2021 and beyond. So in 2020, the total active narrow-body fleet grew by about 5%, while the medium wide-body fleet grew by about 4%. Large wide bodies, by our count, grew about 3%. And we're in a situation where the number of retirements for a number of years now is at a historical low, and the parked fleet is also at a historical low. So in the narrow body category, we count about 710 aircraft. The biggest change there is that we're seeing more 737 NGs come onto the market. We've seen some extra classic deliveries, extra 7.5 deliveries and starting to see some retirements of other types, and also some more MD-80s in there as well. In the medium wide body side, really the biggest growth has been on the 767 side, both in factory built freighters, mainly going to FedEx and UPS, as well as in conversions going to ATSG, Amazon and Co. On the large wide body side, the big changes there have been extra 777 deliveries and a bit of a trickle of a few extra 747-8s. So within each one of the segments, and I include the feeder segment here as well, ATRs and so on, but the focus of this is going to be mainly on the jet segment. What we see in the narrow body and the medium wide body segment, most of the fleet is either operating for or is operated by integrated carriers. In the large wide body segment, which is the home of most of the intercontinental freighter fleet, it's much more diverse. We've got combination carriers in there. We've got scheduled all cargo carriers. We've got your ACMI specialist carriers that are operating for integrators, but also for others, and the express operators themselves. And this is quite key when we start to think about the demand dynamics in each one of these segments, particularly in the narrow body, in the medium wide body, and in the feeder segment. Traditionally, we've only got a handful of customers in there. So FedEx, UPS, DHL, increasingly Amazon, SF Express, and a number of other smaller express operators and postal operators in there. So the freighter decision tree. If you're out for a freighter, unfortunately the used car lot is pretty empty unless you want a DC-10 or an L1011 or want to reactivate something like that. And everybody wants a freighter at the moment. 2020 brought us a new type of freighter, the Praetor. A what? Well, a passenger aircraft that's operating as a freighter, and we've seen a number of airlines, traditionally freighter haters, without any freighters, starting to operate passenger freighters. Everybody seems to be doing it. I haven't quite figured out the economics, but what I do know is that if someone else is paying the costs, be it the aircraft expenses or lease expenses, then these aircraft can make a decent amount of money. And particularly in the peak of the pandemic, where rates were sky high, it was actually possible to make some money with passenger freighters. That being said, there's still quite a few in operation on a lot of major lanes. We see anywhere between 150 and 200 flights a week that are operating on passenger freighters at the moment. But if you want one, sure, go ahead, knock yourself out. Maybe you want something smaller. And there, the choice is really, is it Boeing or is it Airbus? Well, if your choice is, if it ain't Boeing, I'm not going, you can go for 737 Classics and 757s. Not a lot of feedstock left. Maybe 1 or 2 years left in terms of feedstock for those programs. Have you ever thought of getting an MD-80? Traditionally, I thought, well, the only MD-80 customers were going to be the likes of Everts and Aeronavis and USA Jet that are replacing their old DC-9s, but with feedstock close to zero on those aircraft and a pretty reasonable conversion cost, all up, just north of 3 million can get you a freighter on the ramp. So that can be quite an attractive proposition, and I'm sure Bob will talk a bit more about that after. 737 NGs, you're entering the land of plenty. A lot of options since last year, a lot of milestones last year in the freighter conversion business. We saw the first II redelivery of a 737-800 to DHL. We've got 3 737-800 programs out there with Boeing, with II, with AEI. There's been extra capacity in the market in terms of extra lines. And now with the MAX situation solved, the feedstock situation is becoming a lot easier there as well. If you think Airbus is the future, and you want a 321, there will be more, but you'll have to wait a little while. There'll be 320s too in a few years' time, but at the moment the narrow body game is really all about 737s. Medium wide bodies are cool too, particularly if you ask Amazon. 767s, busy town. If you want a new 767, get in line behind the backlog. If you want a converted one, there is more capacity in the market, but there's also more demand in the market. So this year, we expect to see probably about 30 or so redeliveries of 767-300s, and next year looks pretty similar. And that's actually much higher than what the first 5 years of our forecast are saying, where we expect sort of more along the lines of 15 converted and 12 new medium wide bodies every year. So there's definitely more demand in there. With a 330, the question is it 330 time yet? Well, if you wanted a new 330, nobody ever really wanted one anyway, but if you wanted a new 330, that program is officially dead. Converted 330s, getting a little bit of traction, had a couple of extra leasing companies commit to the 330-300. We just had, within the last week or so, Turkmenistan Airways commit to two 330-200 conversions. But so far, DHL is the only operator of the 300 conversion, and Egypt Air only of the 200. If you want something bigger, unfortunately, there's not a lot of choice left in the market. If you want a 747, Boeing isn't selling any new ones anymore, and that program's pretty much going to be finished with the current backlog, unfortunately, sadly. If you want a converted one, look who's back. IAI's got a few in conversion right now. I never thought I'd see this. I thought the program was dead, but it's a strange world. 777s are okay too. Not as good as a 747, but hey, it's a good plane. If you want a 777-300, you're going to need to wait a couple of years until the program receives its STC. If you want a 200F, well, get in line behind the backlog. A 777XF would be really nice, I have to say, but you'll have to ask Boeing about that, what they're doing with that. What about an A350 freighter? Well, the question is, I don't know. Please give Toulouse a call. Somebody also said to me that an A380 freighter would be great. Please tell me who said this. I'd like to have a chat with them. So this is, to get a bit more serious, this is an overview of the current and planned conversion options. What we are seeing is that there is a lot of choice in the narrow body segment, but the STC approval dates seem to keep shifting to the right on Airbus narrow body programs. So we've got options on the classics with AEI and with IAI and with PEMCO, and also obviously on the 757 with ST and with Precision. And we've got some new A320, 321 options emerging. The only current STC at the moment is the EFW one. The 321 Precision one shouldn't be too far behind, and it's a bit of a question what's going to happen with Cinderaco and C3. On the 767, we've got the choice between Boeing and IAI. On the 330, the choice is currently only EFW, but IAI is obviously planning a program there as well. The first new large wide-body conversion program will be for the 777-300 ER, which is expected to receive its STC in 2022, 2023, around that time. And we're, funnily enough, seeing a few stragglers on the 747-400 program there, although the last redeliveries are a few years back on that. So the key questions, and this is my last slide, the key questions going into 2021, in our view, and beyond for that matter, is really this whole demand-supply imbalance. On the narrow body and medium wide body side, the question is whether the underlying demand for freighters has actually been brought forward by a surge in express and e-commerce demand in 2020, or are we going to fall off the cliff? And in that context, are asset owners, particularly leasing companies, getting over eager with regard to the 737-800 and even the 767 without the underlying medium-term market demand to support this? The other question is there too much supply overall in the market, and who's at risk, at most risk of getting burned? Airlines, lessors, or conversion houses? On the large wide-body side, the key question there is how long will the gap between large wide-body supply and demand persist? And that's really a question of how quickly will passenger traffic come back and belly capacity, and how quickly will world trade reach normal levels. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederick. That was really helpful. That was really insightful and a really good overview of the current environment. Unfortunately, our guest from Aviation Group, Rafi, VP and General Manager of Marketing, Rafi Madelon, is not able to join us today. So I'm going to ask our friend Bob Convey from AEI to share his perspective on what he sees developing in the world freighter market at present. Bob?
Very good, Tom. Well, thank you. Let me click into here. Okay, so I'm going to give you a converter's perspective. This is what we're seeing at AEI. Of course, it's focused on narrow body conversions. We can touch a little bit on the medium wide body and wide body, but AEI plays in a very specific arena. Let me go into here. Okay, so a little background on AEI, just for those of you that aren't aware. Founded in 1958, a little bit over 60 years old. Approaching 515 converted narrow body aircraft to date. As we'll talk about later in the presentation, I think the unique thing that we're seeing today is on the active conversion programs, traditionally over the last 5 to 7 years, we've only seen 2, maybe 3 of those programs with aircraft in work. So we've always kind of had some in reserve. So some performed well, others didn't. We always had a steady flow of business. What we're seeing as of say May 2020, when people realized that freight was taking off, is a demand for all 5 types, and we'll go into what our backlog is and our current end work on those specific programs. But I will say that is very unusual, pandemic driven, and it kind of speaks to the frenzy that we're seeing at AEI for freighters of all types within the narrow body segment. AEI, we manufacture our own kits, and I will touch on this because this is becoming an issue. We are seeing, the longer this pandemic continues, an impact on our production. So it's affecting odd things, it's castings, extrusions, and at different times. Sometimes they come back in and they catch up. Other times they're permanently disabled. Companies like Ankara, who provide our cargo handling system, are seeing greater and greater lead times. And again, they're being affected by their suppliers with castings, extrusions, machining. And I'll touch again, we are a Boeing licensed and actually a Bombardier/Mitsubishi licensed provider for the CRJ. So just kind of a quick timeline, kind of a little bit of a history lesson. We've been around so long that we've converted some very unusual aircraft, unique aircraft. I will say probably one of our success stories is Everett's Air up in Fairbanks, who flies our DC-6 freighter currently. They fly several of them. And they're also now flying our MD-80 freighter, again, 5 or 6 of them as well. So they're flying the 2 freighters side by side with about a 30-year span between conversion starts, which is quite unique. But obviously it starts at the early days of DC-6. It ends with the 737-800, which is our current product. And we'll go into a little more detail about what we're seeing in terms of demand there. Here's a quick snapshot of converted aircraft. This is about 420 some odd aircraft out of the 515, but it gives you a good example of where we've been in the past. So 727-1 and 200s, of course, set the foundation for the integrator express market, mainly with FedEx in the early days. 400 plus airplanes. We did about 2/3 of those aircraft conversions. And we think that the 734 had a good chance of getting up there, but it just ran out of feedstock. There simply weren't enough aircraft converted. But we do believe on the very top row there, the 738-800 will eclipse by a factor of 3 or 4 what was converted, at least by AEI, for the 727, 100, and 200s. We see that being an 800 to 1,000 conversion program amongst all suppliers over the next 20, 30 years. So keep your eye on the 800. I think that's going to be the benchmark and set the standard for the narrow body operators. I put this slide up as I was putting together the presentations because it's got a lot of the older and established freight airlines that have been hauling freight around for forever. But what's unique and what we're seeing today is the combination carriers and the new players come into this mix. People like Sun Country, JD, people that just have not been on the radar. And I think, Frederick, you had mentioned combination carriers on narrow bodies made up 3% only. And I think you're going to see that number change. I mean, we're dealing with 4 operators at the moment that are combination carriers, and something we've not seen, at least in the 11 years I've been here. It's primarily been freighter-focused airlines. So keep your eye on the combination narrow-body freighter space. I think that's going to really start to pick up in the next few years. And the question is, will it stay? Is this just a fad of people trying to protect their bottom line through adding freighters? Maybe they were burned in the passenger side and just didn't want to have that happen again. Or are they going to find this as a stable revenue source and we're going to see them here for the long haul? I mean, time will tell, but the different carriers we're seeing, I would say that we're going to see a resurgence of combination carriers, at least on the narrow body side going forward. AEI has 5 conversion centers, 2 commercial jet on the top, KF Aerospace up in Kelowna, and then 2 in China, Staco and HAECO. All centers are now active with conversions in-house, and we are at full capacity this year. We've got 36 deliveries planned for 2021, and we have sold out every slot and are trying to figure out ways to put a few more in, and we're booking about halfway into 2022 at the moment. So what I want to do here is just go through as an example of what we're seeing in terms of demand, backlog, what's on order. So CRJ, we've done about 20 of these conversions. There's currently 2 in work. There's 4 on order. 2 of those 4 on order are with a new customer. So we're glad to see that. But this seems to be picking up. And maybe to Frederick's point of we're seeing aircraft converted that maybe you wouldn't have converted a few years ago, but demand is so strong at the moment. People are starting to look at all options. The 300 has an interesting story. We've never been a big player in the 300. That was IAI and PEMCO that were extremely successful with that aircraft. This is for Nauru Airlines. We've completed 1. This is the second one, just arrived. It starts work next week. But there was talk a few years back that when the 400s ran out of feedstock, we would see a run on the 300 conversions. And that never really happened, either for PEMCO or AEI. And I think that speaks to the need for more volume for larger aircraft. And we're seeing that play out. If you fast forward to the NGs, we're seeing that play out between the 700 and the 800. We're not seeing the demand for the 700 that some thought we would, but all that demand is going to the 800, which is obviously one more position than the 400 and more volume. So that's playing to the need for larger aircraft. Our 400 continues to be successful. If we had 200 more aircraft in feedstock, we would be probably converting 100 of them. So we have 4 in work at the moment. All of them now have homes. They have airlines to go to. There's 4 more on order that'll start work this year. Aero Novice TSM, who's been a CRJ and an MD-80 consumer of ours, is now moved into a 400. March 1st is the first one. And they'll do about a half a dozen more. So we're looking for a large fleet from TSM on this. But again, it's one at a time. It's difficult to find them. Finding the right pedigree is challenging. And then on to what's going to be our future, all of our futures, the 800. It's currently 6 in work. We have 32 on order. We'll deliver just shy of 30 this year. And then 28 options on that. And we're booked about a third of the way through on the 800s into 2022. So Again, really strong demand. The strong demand started for us anyway in May as feedstock values started to fall. I mean, it was very early days in May of 2020, but that was the challenge we were having in early 2020 and 2019 was 20-year-old, $20 million 800. If you could find one, if you could get your hands on it, just didn't make an economical freighter. It just was too expensive at the time. We're seeing that same 20-year-old freighter trading for less than 10 million these days. So you're seeing a dramatic change. And I don't think that decreasing of prices stop. I think you're going to continue to see that drop a little bit more, kind of end up between 8 and 10 million. And that's where it needs to be for the operators, for narrow body investors, lessors that are looking to convert. Just keeps marching downhill, but that's one of the reasons you're seeing such large numbers in the conversion backlogs. And then one of my favorite freighters, along with the 757 actually, is the MD-80. We continue to see orders for this. There's one in work at the moment. There's 7 on order. I think Everett starts another one February 1st. USA Jet starts one March 1st. And USA just recently purchased 40 plus MD-88s out of Delta. So we'll see what they end up doing with all those MD-88s. But a program that just keeps going on, and we're seeing kind of a renewed life in this aircraft, which is nice to see this far along, almost 10 years now in the program. So in 2020, we added as an industry globally about 125 new and converted freighters. My guess, AEI's estimate, that number is going to grow to 150 plus, just based upon everybody's backlog and what we're seeing in terms of current demand, which is an incredibly large number. What's driving that? Well, of course, the pandemic, which we just said May is whenever someone flipped the light switch on and we just saw incredible demand. But through the pandemic, that's being driven by people staying at home, ordering products online, e-commerce. We think has been accelerated at least 4 or 5 years from its normal progression due to the pandemic. People are just ordering more at home, and I think that is going to be a shift change. I think people that maybe didn't order stuff years ago are now exposed to it, and a certain number of those consumers are going to continue ordering online, which is going to do nothing but help our industry. In addition to that, aiding the growth is going to be the new entrants into the space. So the Sun Countries, JD.coms, there's a lot of new entrants coming into this space, and it's all being fueled again, as I said, by cheap feedstock. The prices of everything have come down just due to the number of grounded aircraft. And that's really feeding this frenzy, as I like to call it. So the question is, if you go back up top, 150 freighters a year, new and converted, how long can we absorb this as an industry? That's a lot of aircraft. We're looking at least 2 years, and hopefully it trickles into the 3rd year, kind of at these 150 a year numbers. That's 450 airplanes. It's quite a lot to absorb. We're not seeing, as Frederick said, the retirements that we expected to see. People are hanging on to aircraft. So people like ASL are taking hundreds. They're not letting go of their 400s, and they're not letting go of those aircraft because there's still demand by their customers. So on top of that, global growth, we're seeing companies like Amazon just take an incredible leap in terms of their freighter fleet. They're continuing to grow. They don't show signs of slowing. That's replicated at JD.com and other Alibaba and other express companies around the world. So in all, I think we're going to continue to see this growth for at least 2 years, if not 3. So that's kind of a narrow body conversion outlook. And let me put this back to Frederick. So back to you.
Hey, Bob, thank you very much. That was really insightful and really helpful for channeling this discussion this afternoon. It's a great honor to introduce my longtime friend and colleague, Brian Hermesmeyer, who is our Director, Freighter Customer Leader here at Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Brian, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everybody who's listening in today. Again, my name is Brian Hermesmeyer, and I'm with Boeing Company. I'd like to walk us through kind of our perspective on the air cargo market and where it's been in 2020 and where we see it's going. So as Bob alluded to, the freighter fleet grew quite a bit in 2020. And by our estimates, and the numbers will still come in as the year closed out, on the order of 120 aircraft were added to the freighter fleet last year. And that's a really, really significant growth. It's a combination of new aircraft, a combination of converted aircraft, and also aircraft that were brought out of long-term storage. Several 747s as the year advanced, for example, were brought out of very long-term storage programs and put back into service because of the demand on the freighter market. Those operations of those airplanes, certainly they've been working really, really hard. At the end of the year, most recent data showed about 113% of pre-pandemic levels. We certainly have seen spikes higher than that through the course of the peak season that we just came out of. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. But clearly, the world freighter fleet is working extremely hard. And as part of that, we've seen very strong market demand for our family of freighters, the most comprehensive family of freighters in the industry. Starting with the 737, we have over 156 orders and commitments for our 37800 BCF program. And right behind that, we have the 67 BCF program now with over 76 orders and commitments. And as Bob alluded to, the space has gotten very busy in the last year. The market has been coming and looking for freighter conversion providers, and we have added capacity at the end of last year to help meet that market demand. And we'll continue to examine that as the market moves forward and demand continues. Not to be left out now, of course, are our factory freighters. The 67 has been really proven itself to be the choice for express carriers around the world with over 230 orders now. Strong fleets with major express carriers like DHL, UPS, FedEx, and carriers, emerging carriers in markets in China, carriers like SF Express committing to 67300 BCFs, a great companion to the strong factory solution in the 67300 freighter. The 777 is really showing its versatility and its place in the market as the premier large wide-body twin-engine freighter. 242 orders to date as of December of last year, more orders announced this year, and has really shown that it can perform in both the general freight arena with its extremely good density and really strong floor loading, as well as in the express markets, leveraging the aircraft's range. And then, of course, at the top end, the queen of the skies, the 47-8 freighter with 106 orders, and that aircraft will conclude production next year. But that isn't where we end. Boeing will continue to support that family for a long time to come as those aircraft continue to perform well and serve a vital purpose in the air cargo market. Now, I talked about at the start, alluded to how hard freighters are working, and I think this chart makes it very, very clear. Capacity has really been under a crunch since the start of the pandemic, and I think everybody really has talked about that over the course of the year, and it's fairly well understood that the absence of wide-body passenger belly lift has really put the capacity in a difficult place for air cargo. If you look to the right, at the end of fourth quarter last year, we're still at least 16% below the total global capacity that we had in the prior quarter from the prior year. And freighters are certainly shouldering the majority of the burden as all of this wide body belly lift has been sidelined because of the pandemic. Year on year, as we get into January, we're running about 28% AFTKs higher for the dedicated freighters. You see that there have been higher peaks than that as we've gone through the peak season. But as we'll explore later, I'm sure in the panel, wide body belly lift and when it comes back is certainly influencing the need for and the operation of dedicated freighters. It's a little bit spread as to how the carriers around the world by business model are seeing growth. Clearly, with the increase in e-commerce and increase in home delivery type shipments, a lot of B2C activity. As people can't get to traditional brick and mortar retail to buy their goods, we're certainly seeing a significant growth in the express carriers. All cargo carriers seeing a similar growth as we are more reliant on main deck freight to deliver goods and certain goods around the world. And other carriers that are a little bit more reliant on passenger belly space, not quite seeing the same growth simply because of those large wide body aircraft being parked as international travel is greatly curtailed by the pandemic. It's always worth remembering the incredible role that freighters play in air cargo markets with, in 2019 terms, $106 billion in air cargo revenue. And airlines operating freighters really generate the overwhelming percentage of that revenue. Express carriers and combination carriers in a normal time, in a time non-pandemic, generate about almost over 3/4 of air cargo revenue. And of course, this has been a challenge in 2020 as the express carriers have seen growth and the all cargo carriers have also seen growth because of the lack of belly capacity. Now, the big question I think everybody wants to try to find the answer to, and we all try to use our crystal balls to try to predict is when is this going to recover? When will economic recovery come, and how is that going to affect air cargo capacity? And clearly, as we've all talked about, and we'll talk about more, it's tightly tied to available belly space, which in traditional times forms about just under half of the capacity in the market. So as we come out of the pandemic, air cargo capacity will track as that passenger recovery happens and as that economic recovery happens. It'll probably lag, we believe, just a little bit. And as you see in the data here from Oxford Economics and IATA, that getting back to 2019 levels should come somewhere around the 2023, perhaps 2024 timeframe. The underlying drivers of the need for air cargo, industrial production, trade, GDP, all trending positive a little bit sooner. We've seen a really strong return in trade as China has gotten back to business throughout the course of the pandemic. So as passenger traffic recovers, so will air cargo capacity. And you can kind of see how this tracks very closely with predictions for air passengers or the passenger market recovery. When we look further out and we look at the 20-year forecast that we do biannually with our World Air Cargo Forecast, my colleague Tom Crabtree is key in the publishing of that document. Strong underlying numbers will continue to drive cargo traffic. And over the 20-year forecast period that we do with our World Air Cargo Forecast, we see that continuing at a rate of 4%. The freighter fleet will continue to grow. Trade growth will continue to occur, and industrial production will continue to grow too. So the underlying drivers that create traffic all will remain strong over the 20 years. And as a result, we will need a lot more freighters. At the end of 2019, the freighter fleet stood at 2,000, a little over 2,000 units. But over the course of this forecast period, 2019 through 2039, we see the fleet growing by over 60%, with over 2,400 deliveries necessary to get us to an ultimate fleet of around 3,260 units. You see a large number of standard body conversions. Bob has spoken about how the strength he's seen in his business. We certainly are seeing strength in that space as well. And over 20 years, we expect to see over 1,000 units required for the standard body space. Of course, there are no factory-built solutions. All of these come from conversions. Medium wide bodies, a mix of converted and new units, depending upon the business model and the individual carrier needs, and 450 new large wide bodies. So just to summarize, COVID-19 certainly has reduced near-term capacity, and we have seen an acceleration in e-commerce demand as people have been forced to purchase things through e-commerce channels as opposed to being able to go to the stores. Freighters continue to carry over half of the air cargo traffic and are working extremely hard through the course of the pandemic, and we do see continued strong growth over the next 20 years in the freighter space. And if you'd like to explore that a little bit further, I recommend taking a look at our World Air Cargo Forecast. It was released at the end of last year in November. A lot of great information and insight into not just air cargo aircraft themselves, but the markets and how we see the markets evolving over the next 20 years. And with that, I will hand it back to Tom, and we will get into our panel questions. Tom?
Brian, thank you very much. That was a really good overview as well, and added to a little more color and detail to the data that Frederick and Bob shared earlier. Gives me it's a great pleasure to introduce my good friend, Rafi Madelon, VP and General Manager Marketing at II Aviation Group, who joins us from Israel tonight. Rafi, the floor is yours.
Hi, Tom. Thank you very much. I apologize for my delay. There was some misunderstanding, but finally, I'm here with you, and this is the importance. So, thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this panel and to continue our legacy panels and discussion regarding IAI conversions. So with your permission, I have some slides. I will do it very shortly. to present about our capabilities, and then we can go to the questions. So actually, IAI is a government company. We're around 15,000 employees. It's divided to four groups, as you see it in the right-hand side. We have the military, we have the radars, and we have the space and satellites. But we, aviation group, we are the commercial group, and this is the place that we develop, develop all our programs, the conversion programs in the last 40 years. I can say this is our core business in our group, the conversions, and we're leading the world with this product. So I mentioned we're around 15,000 employees. We are spread all around the world. Our sales on 2019 was around $4 billion, and we have a future backlog of $13 billion. Our facility is close. The major facility is in Ben Gurion Airport and around the country. I would like to share with you a slogan of our EVP, Mr. Yossi Melamed, that he's taking with him, and day by day he's talking about this, to a salute to those who dream and those who dare. And you will see that in aviation group we are doing it's a 4 business line. I will talk right now. One of them are the conversion, but we manufacture the jet business. We're doing the conversion, innovation, MRO, and etc. So actually, in aviation group, and I'm charged on the marketing for this organization. We have 4 business line. The first one is Bedek MRO. For the last 60 years, we are leading in the MRO, one-stop shop. We have in-house all facilities and capabilities for engine overall, components, and airframe, all the family of Boeing and Airbus. We have the second one is the aircraft business line, where we are manufacture the jet business. This is the G280. We have the lab aerostructure, and this is the place where we are manufacturing aerostructure for the commercial subcontract to Boeing, Airbus, composite material, and some military aerostructure like the wings of the F-35, F-16, cockpit of F-15, and etc. So conversion and upgrades, this is the place, this is the business line that we develop all our STCs, the conversions, and doing some military upgrades for helicopter and jet fighters. In our group, we have the biggest engineering division, more than 1,500 engineers that they have a capability to design an aircraft from scratch to certification, final certification, and everything we can do in-house. So I'm going directly to our business, which is the conversions. And I don't think there is any company in the world except Boeing, but even Boeing, not with all the types. So we start with the 747, the oldest 747, and we still keep the 747-400 conversion line. I know, Tom, that you are sensitive to the 747s. So there is a lot of interest, I can tell you, since the COVID start, and I hope that very soon we will sign the contract with one or two customers for combis and full passenger that are in the market right now. So we move to the 737 Classic, and once we start to develop the new generation, which is the 700 and 800, we stop. We close this conversion line and leave the stage for Bob. So right now we're facing a lot of interest on the 800s, and I think I mentioned it yesterday. We still before the big wave for the 737-800s. And it can see, you know, by the internet, or Boeing can say this, they are the only company mostly that manufacture or converted for GCAS. But in the last 2 months, as I mentioned, there was a lot of interest from small companies, I say also listing companies and airlines, which is a new, this COVID, the impact of the COVID bring airlines that were not involved on freight operation to reduce the risk in a bad time like the COVID. So there is a lot of interest from those airlines. And we moved to the 767-200. We were alone in the market, and we convert around 70 aircraft. We still have conversion for -200 from some customers. And then we developed the 767-300 together with Boeing, our competitor. And I'm proud, you know, to say that we convert more than 80 -300. We are running now 8 conversion lines in parallel in Israel and remote site. And I can inform you that we have a few slots for 2023. Yeah, I don't think that any company was in such situation, and I'm happy. So this is regarding the 767s. And the last one, it's the 777-300ER that we are in the process of developing in the last year. The developing plan is going well. We are following the plan. Aircraft should arrive from the state by 1 month, and we are going to ground it for the conversion. The meaning is that we are going to put in the jig position and start cutting, replacing floor beams. And we expect to get the VSTC from the FAA in the end of 2022. We have a launch customer, as you know, GCAS, with 15 firm order plus 15 option. It's a huge quantity, a huge operation. And we look to develop sites also out of Israel. So this is regarding the 777. I will add again that there is a lot. I don't know if the COVID is the trigger, but there is a lot of interest from biggest airline and biggest leasing company that own the 777-300ER. It's an excellent aircraft with excellent performances. I will permit myself to say even better than the production freighter by the volume and e-commerce. And we are expecting to be very loaded with this, let me say, the replacement of the 747 as a wide body, the king of the wide body in the coming 15, 20 years. Another project that we hope very soon to announce is the Airbus 330. That will be the first Airbus platform that we are going to develop. And the reason is very simple. The feedstock for the 767, we believe by 2023 or 2024, it will be zero. And we think that the Airbus 330-300 is the alternative, the ideal alternative for this mid-size niche. So I hope that very soon we will announce it. And as I mentioned, this chart summarizes all the programs that we have. And you can see by the payload and by the range. And this is the experience that we gain and bring us to lead the world on conversion, which combine experience with narrow body, mid-size, and wide body. And you can see here all the variety of the projects that we design and develop. In the right side, you can see that we done in the past in the 11 and 757, which was built to print. All those here in the chart are our design and developing the STC. So if I'm summarizing this business line of the conversion, the leading house of P2F conversion, it's we're providing a premium product, professional and reliable. And we believe based on this that we are an OEM of the G280, the Gulfstream, bring us to a special methods that we are doing the conversion, which is different from our competitors, which bring a lot of advantage to the operator. Hold on for a minute. Wow. I will try to show you a very short clip. So thank you very much for the patience. I appreciate very much. Thank you.
Rafi, thank you for the overview and the short video clip of II's achievements in the freighter conversion business. And so we've got about a little less than what appears to be 6 minutes to do a Q&A to conclude on time. So Bob, you already answered the first of my questions that I proposed to the team here. Basically, we've seen a grounding of much of the world's passenger capacity, and freighters have had to step into the breach. In normal times, like the last full normal year we had, 2019, there were 26,000 jet transports in the world flying around, but only 2,000 of those are freighters, as Brian pointed out. And the question is, as Bob kind of posed, are we heading for an oversupply situation? And Bob kind of answered his own question. He's going to see growth for 2 to 3 years. Frederick, I'm going to throw the question back at you. How long will this go on? Is freighter demand outstripping supply?
Yeah, I mean, if I look at the first 5 years of our forecast, we were assuming about 48 narrow body deliveries a year for the next 5 years, which is kind of what we had last year, and about 27 or so retirements. So we haven't seen a lot of retirements at the moment. So there's a bit of a safety valve in there in the business there. With the medium wide body segment, we were sort of expecting to see about 14 retirements a year over the next 5 years, about 12 factory built freighters per year, and about 15 conversions. We're way above that number right now. On the large wide body, I guess there's not a lot of room for surprises there because there's not a lot of room for options. So we were sort of forecasting about 16 retirements a year, which we haven't been seeing either, and about 27 or so deliveries between new build and conversions. We're definitely in a situation right now, I would say, in the narrow body sector and the medium wide body sector where we're seeing a lot more demand than what we expected. And yes, that is driven by some of the new entrants, as Bob mentioned that. It's driven by, particularly with the medium wide bodies, by what Amazon is doing. It can't go on for longer than more than a couple of years. I don't think the underlying demand is there in the market. And if we're building everything on e-commerce demand, it brings me back to the question that I always ask is, who pays for free shipping, right? I mean, FedEx and UPS and DHL, they're getting $50, $60 a shipment on the International Express, and somewhere between $10, $15 a shipment on average for the domestic air express. Nobody pays anywhere near that for their e-commerce shipping, and that's the kind of yields you need to run an air network.
Frederick, I guess we're talking about availability of freighters this afternoon. I'm going to put my colleague Brian on the spot. Hey, Brian, are there any, our listeners, our participants in this forum are wanting to know where can they get freighters, and are there any parked viable freighters out there of any quantity that people can obtain in early 2021?
Let's thanks, Tom. I think we was alluded to earlier by either Bob or Frederick that the parked fleet, that traditional parked fleet that we usually see out there, has pretty much been pulled back into service. And when you think about where can I go find a freighter quickly, as Bob alluded to, demand has been very strong. We've seen really strong demand in our conversion business. We are continuing to deliver brand new freighters coming off our line every day. And the ability to go find something that's been sitting and bring it back into service is getting pretty thin. We've seen a lot of reactivations, especially of 47400 freighters, primarily conversions, some nose loaders that have been in storage for extremely long time. And getting those aircraft back into service comes at a cost, and people have to weigh what that cost is with what they believe they can capture with that aircraft. So it has been a real challenge to find freighter lift right now, especially reactivating out of the stored fleet. It's gotten really small. I'd say we're down to probably about a dozen or so viable airplanes that could still come back. Thanks, Brian. I'm going to throw this question out to any one of the panelists that's willing to answer. So right now we're all seeing unprecedented, is a kind of an overused word these days, but unprecedented demand for freighters. And this demand will only start to lessen probably when PAX belly, particularly large wide body passenger belly capacity returns to the world air transport system in general. Question, which market, in your opinion, regionally, like transatlantic, trans-Pacific, Europe, Asia, intra-Europe, Middle East, what market will be back first, in your opinion? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll venture a guess. The Pacific routes I think are going to recover quicker, just for the supply of goods as the economies recover in Europe and in the U.S. You're going to see manufacturing come back, and that's going to drive the demand for those lower passenger bellies, which will have an impact on the wide body freighters that are out there. And I think when you look at the recovery of the bellies, it's also important to remember that narrow bodies aren't really affected in the same way that wide bodies are by the return of passenger belly freight. They fly on different routes, different sectors, and passenger narrow bodies aren't necessarily equipped to handle the same kind of freight or containerization that the wide body is. So I think you're going to have a little bit different recovery curve on the narrow body routes than you will on the wide body routes as the passengers start to come back on those transcons.
I think I'll follow on with Bob. You know, it's going to be highly dependent upon how the world economies open themselves back up, and a lot of that's going to be clearly tied to the success of vaccination programs and the availability of vaccines and countries' willingness to open their borders back up to international travel. And that'll be highly dependent on the success of vaccines and getting people comfortable again with international travel. Should the Transpac come back first and we start to see a lot of large wide bodies come back there, also good to remember that a lot of that lift on that particular market is provided by main deck freighters due to the length of the routes that fly Transpac on large wide bodies. You don't necessarily have that entire lower hold available to you to fly freight. So Transpac comes back first. I think that will help with capacity, but it's still heavily reliant on main deck freighters.
You know, my opinion is that the vaccine is not a parameter for my opinion, you know, because I saw how they shipped it, you know, and the size. So all the passenger aircraft can carry this. I don't think this will be the boom of the freighter, but I think that the belly will be dominant again in the moment that the long haul will be open again, you know. And we see today that the domestic, and you can see some charts, statistic, and etc., that the most domestic flights, like in China or in North America, they have operation, but I don't see the long haul. And the long haul, this is the major, I think, channel that the lower bay or the belly will take place again. You know, that's my opinion.
Last question for panelists. What are the biggest opportunities in front of us in the next year to 5 years in the freighter industry?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's going to be in the narrow body sector just due to the amount of feedstock and the current demand. I think you're going to see the 800 and to a lesser degree the 321 in terms of a conversion product or a freighter entering the market be the greatest opportunity, not only for airlines, but for lessors or investment groups. Just it's got the greatest acceptance, and it's going to really drive, I think, the conversion totals. As you've seen, in, you know, Brian, when you reviewed the forecast, 1,000+ airplanes, I think is not unheard of to estimate most of those will be 800s.
Yeah, we're also seeing a lot of extra demand in sort of the regional domestic flying space, which is obviously good for narrow bodies and medium wide bodies as well. But I think the biggest opportunity from a manufacturer perspective is actually in the large wide body space, because there's no options left in that segment, and that's, you know, RAF is getting in there in a couple of years' time, but I still think there's a place for a 747-8, but that's water under the bridge. But I think there's a place for a 777XF or even an A350. So the first mover in that one is going to win the day.
I appreciate that segue. It says, as your moderator, I'm going to wrap up with that comment because we're about 4 minutes past due to conclude with the fact that in the large wide body space, which is anything that carries 80 metric tons of revenue payload or more, so that's Indy 11s, 747s of all variants, and the 777, only about 45% of large wide bodies flying today are in production at the present. And as a consequence, there's a lot of aging airplanes and MD-11s and 747-400 series aircraft that are going to need replacement. So Brian and I are standing by to discuss with you further about this at a future availability of freighters panel. With that, I express my sincere gratitude and utter thanks for your time and attention to detail on this panel this afternoon, this evening, this morning. And I turn the panel back over to Lars Gunnar. Lars Gunnar, thank you.
There he is.
Thank
Brave
you,
new
Tom.
world.
Sorry. It has been a long day, but I would like to remind you that our networking function will be open for 2 more hours. So please take the opportunity to meet new customers or just have a nice chat with old friends. But the most important thing is that I would like to see you tomorrow, because we will have a real stellar panel tomorrow morning, European time. You know, the big challenge, delivering vaccines to all corners of the world. 12 great speakers, including 3 speakers from the pharma industry. I think that it will be a highly interesting panel. So see you tomorrow, 9 o'clock Frankfurt time, 12 o'clock Dubai time, or 4 o'clock Hong Kong time. Take your pick. See you tomorrow. Thanks, bye.